Good morning, church. Isaiah 41 is where we'll start today. Isaiah 41. While you're looking at it, I just want to express my gratitude and my thanks to those of you who have been praying for us. We're finally all back at home. Joshua's out of hospital after a 3-week stay this time, roughly. And Lauda's glad to be able to get a good night of sleep as well. Drama's not over, of course. We go back in another month to Starship for a heart procedure on the little guy. And now they're investigating kidneys, whatever that means. So do continue to pray for him, we ask you, as we're still trying to figure out all the ins and the outs of what's going on. All right, this morning, Isaiah 51 starts with these words in verse 17. It says, "When the poor and the needy search for water, and there is none, and their tongues are parched from thirst, then I, the Lord, will answer them. I, the God of Israel, will never abandon them. I will open up rivers for them on the high plateaus. I will give them fountains of water in the valleys. I will fill the desert with pools of water. Rivers fed by springs will flow across the parched land. I will plant trees in the barren desert, cedar, acacia, myrtle, olive, cypress, fir, and pine. I am doing this so all who see this miracle will understand what it means, that it is the Lord who has done this, the Holy One of Israel, who created it." I'm not sure that you and I can fully understand this passage because we live in New Zealand. And in New Zealand, I've discovered that when we don't get rain for 3 weeks, we're having a drought, right? We get so much rain, perhaps too much rain, at least in the majority of the country, that is, that I don't know that we fully understand. Maybe if we were in certain parts of Australia today, we would understand the stark contrast with what God is trying to say to the Israelites here. Imagine a place that has it's gone past being a dust bowl. There's not a blade of grass. There's nothing that lives there. It's absolutely barren. It's starved of life-giving water. And imagine you live in a place like that, as hard as it is to imagine that, because that's not where we live. But if you can just begin to imagine that, you can understand the import of these words. It is the difference between life and death. It is, for those who are on the verge of death, an incredible hope. A transformation, a new day, a new era. That God has the ability to take a wasteland, a place that hasn't seen life for who knows how long, and turn it into a place of abundance and of luxury, of fertility and of life, of greenery, of mighty trees. A place where you can build homes and live safely and cultivate the ground and feed your family. I mean, this is the difference between water and no water. It's why this planet is such a habitable place, because it is called the blue planet. Water is a fitting metaphor for life, and that's why you will find that Jesus refers to himself as the water of life. That's why when you go to the end of the Bible in the book of Revelation, you will find a picture of the throne in the New Jerusalem. And out of the throne flows what? The river of life, which feeds the tree of life from which the nations will eat one day and live with immortality forever. Water is the elixir of life. In fact, if you've ever been really thirsty and you've tried to quench your thirst with anything other than water, perhaps you have drunk a coffee or a Coca-Cola or a Fanta or something other than, or even a fruit juice, you will know that within just a few minutes of feeling satisfied, you're what? You're thirsty again. Because there is only one fluid, one liquid, which will actually end a thirst proper, and that is water. There's only one thing you can drink when you're thirsty and truly not want to drink any more afterwards, and that is water. because the human body is mostly water. We're designed to live on a planet filled with water. And so Jesus comes along and he says, I am the water of life. He's playing on the fact that we all understand the physical urges. We all understand the physical lack. And we all understand physical satisfaction. And Jesus uses that metaphor time and time again to say, now what you know of the physical will teach you something of the spiritual. Because ever since the Garden of Eden and Adam and Eve's failing there, humanity's failing there, the human race has experienced spiritual thirst. On the 13th of December, 1863, there was a major battle, a very significant battle in the town of Fredericksburg in the United States. It was during the heat of the Civil War, right? You know about the Civil War in the United States. The Confederates in the South and the Union forces in the North, right? And it had come to boiling point over the issue of slavery, but there were various other issues there. And the Union forces were down in the South, in the Confederate states, and they were at war with one another. And the Confederate forces had met the Union forces in this town of Fredericksburg. 13th of December, 1863, 62, 63, somewhere around there. And when the two forces met there, the Union forces came off second best. The 13th of December, the gunfire was exchanged, the crossfire was experienced, the sun went down, the wounded who were still mobile walked themselves under the cover of darkness to the field hospital, but there were still many, many men stuck on the battlefield, the vast majority of which were Union forces. In fact, when the sun came up, it was revealed that there were about 8,000 men still pinned down on the battlefield, unable to move themselves, many of them still alive. And as the sun went up in the sky and it got hotter, these men who were wounded and in pain and who were suffering were crying out, "Water! Water!" And both on the Union side and on the Confederate side, both of these warring forces, who were of the same nationality, right, were of the same people at war with one another, of the same family at war with one another, listened to their comrades, their countrymen, crying out for mercy, for help, for water. Eventually, a man by the name of Kirkland couldn't take it anymore, and he went to the brigadier general on his side. This was the Confederate side, Joseph Kershaw, and he said to him, I need to go out and help these men. Those men, son, are your enemies. They are the Union forces that are pinned down on the battlefield. You are not going out there. And so the cries for help continued. Water! Water! We're dying without water. Both the Union and the Confederates listened to us for hours and for hours and for hours until eventually Kirkland went back to the Brigadier General and said, I have to go out there and help those men. All right, son, you go out and help them, but you go out and you help them at your own risk. You understand you're going out in red, right? You're not the friendly. And there's nothing we can do to help you if you go out there. You do this at your own risk. And so the man gathered as many canteens that he could, filled them up with water, and ventured out onto the battlefield. And while he was out there, the Confederate forces were waiting for the first gunfire from the Union forces before they unleashed another torrent of bullets. And they waited and they waited. Of course, the Confederates knew what was going on, and the Union forces soon figured out that this man was helping their wounded. And that entire day, this tense stalemate, waiting for one side to fire so that the other side could justifiably open fire, this standoff between the two lasted for hours on end while Kirkland went around picking up the heads of the wounded and feeding them with water, dressing their wounds, both the Confederate soldiers and the Union soldiers. And today there is a statue in that place that marks his heroism and his bravery, and he's known as the Angel of Maryville. You see, water is the only thing that will quench a thirst. And when I think of that story, I think, isn't that the story of the cross? Isn't that the gospel walked out? The God who left heaven above to come and tend to the needs of his enemies, lying on the battlefield, still in rebellion against him, still determined to be at war with him, but crying out in their souls, water, we die for a lack of water. We're trying to quench our thirst at the broken cisterns, the reservoirs of the world. We're drinking the junk drinks, the sugary drinks of the world, so to speak, if you understand the metaphor. We're trying to quench our thirst with all sorts of things. And in the moment, we think, maybe we found the reason for living. Maybe we found the thing that will satisfy our souls, but it's not long. It's not long before the thirst is back. And you'll know that when the thirst comes back, it comes back worse than it was before. We're spiritually dehydrated, dying of thirst on the battlefield. And Jesus steps into this world. He knows, not like Kirkland, who might get shot. In fact, Jesus knows the only way to really deal with the thirst of humanity is not to put himself at risk, but to put himself in a position where he's guaranteed of death. Because to satisfy the quench, or to quench the thirst of the human race, he must take our place in death. I believe that it is this concept that lies at the heart, at the core of understanding the perpetual cycles of addiction that we get stuck in. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about a substance abuse addiction. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about a sexual addiction. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about a gambling addiction or some other addiction to some socially acceptable form, whether it's work or whether it's adrenaline or whether it's whatever else, right? It doesn't really matter what your flavor of addiction is. And I might look at you and I might think, I don't get your struggle. I am not a drug addict, or I'm not a sex addict, or I'm not a this thing. I mean, that's in a whole different league. I'm not like that. I'm not as bad as that. But the thing is this, at the core of the human heart, we are all starved for the water of life. And how you manifest that may look different to how that manifests for me. The particular outward sign, the place where you choose to drink. You might like the Coca-Cola and I might like Fanta, and I don't understand why you drink Coca-Cola and you don't understand why I drink Fanta, but neither of us are drinking from the water of life. And both of us are drinking that which will only perpetuate our thirst. At the core of the human experience, we are the same. The outward symptoms may look different, and I might judge you because you don't drink like I drink. But neither of us is drinking what we really need. Until you come to the only place where your thirst will be quenched, until you allow the only one with the water of life to minister to your heart and to your soul, to pick you up on the battlefield, to dress your wounds and to feed you with the water of life, until you allow that to happen, you will be constantly and always stuck in the ongoing cycles, the perpetual cycles of addiction. You may conquer one addiction only to find another in its place. And I want to suggest to you that this is why the church has an indispensable place in the world. You see, you have something that no rehabilitation center funded by the government is allowed to give to the world, because it's socially unacceptable. It's politically incorrect to talk about this with government funding. Does that make sense to you? Yes, they do a good job of drying people out. Yes, they do a good job of helping people to get past the physical throes of addiction. But it's not the physicality of addiction that drives your addiction. The physicality of your addiction, it hurts in the short term, but that's what it is. It's a short-term struggle. But so many people relapse after physical restoration. Why? Because the spiritual core of their being is still thirsting. They have not found satisfaction from the water of life. So listen to me, you who belong to Christ. Listen to me, you who are the church. You have something to give the world. You have something to say to the cigarette addict, the alcohol addict, the drug addict, the sex addict, the adrenaline addict, or whatever it is. You have something to give them. No, you may not have drunk that particular Kool-Aid, but you have something to give them if you've drunk from the fountain of the water of life. Because we're very similar at our core. We are thirsty human beings, trying by our best efforts to satisfy our thirst. Hey, when you go to the New Testament, when you read the struggle of the New Testament, you will know that Jesus waged war with this thing called legalism. Do you understand what I'm talking about? You'll find it in the book of Galatians. You'll find that Paul and the other Bible writers waged war against this thing called legalism, which we often call works. And when you read it in the New Testament, it sounds so academic and it sounds so divorced from where we are as a society today. You know, this idea that you can earn your favor with God by keeping the law, by doing this, by doing that, by being religious, by doing whatever you think the recipe is that'll make God look down from heaven and pat you on the back and go, now you've got it all together, son. Now you've got it all together, daughter. Now I can love you. See, that's the definition of works or of legalism, the attempt to impress God by what I do. But I want to swap that all around this morning. That is the theological definition. That's what you'll find happening in the New Testament. But I want to swap that all around. I want to say to you today, there is another form of works alive in our world today, perhaps a form of works that we are more familiar with as the Gentile nations, because that's what we are, right? The Gentile nations. You know what that form of works is? The many faces, the many varieties that we try to quench our own thirst by. It may have nothing to do with the law of God. It may have nothing to do with even trying to impress God per se, but we're trying to fix the brokenness of our own hearts in our own ways. We're turning to things in an attempt to find satisfaction, contentment, fulfillment, the meaning of life, to make it all worthwhile. And it's the works of our own hands. It's the attempt to self-medicate. It's the attempt to make ourselves whole, even if it's with no reference to what God thinks of us. It is the attempt to do it myself. And it's futile. It will not satisfy. It will not last. Your only hope is in turning to the one who came to the battlefield, in turning to the one who is the source of the water of life. Jesus Christ is the one who offers to give you, your soul, what you are trying to find in your own strength, in your own wisdom, that lack that you feel within yourself. It is a perpetual part of the human experience because human beings were designed by an intelligent creator. We were designed to work in a certain way. We were designed to live in a certain way. This social network that is called humanity was designed for relationship not only with one another, but relationship with God. An intrinsic part of your design plan is fellowship with the source of life. You were not designed to be an orphan. You were not created to be alone in the universe. You were created to be in the presence of the Heavenly Father, the Heavenly Parent that birthed you, that came up with the idea of you, that gave the you life. You were designed for that. Which until you meet that requirement, that truest, deepest need of your soul, will always find the void that you try to fill with this thing, that thing, or the next thing. And they will provide temporary, illusory satisfaction. But the novelty will wear off. The bankruptcy will ensue. The thirst will return. And the cycle will perpetuate. Until you drink from the fountain of life. Of course, when you read Isaiah chapter 55, just a few chapters after this, you'll find exactly the same metaphor. Is anyone thirsty? Come and drink. Even if you have no money, come. Take your choice of wine or milk. It's all free. Why spend your money on food that does not give you strength? Why pay for food that does you no good? Listen to me, and you will eat what is good. You will enjoy the finest food. He translates this metaphor in verse 6 into plain language. He says, seek the Lord while you can find Him. Call on Him now while He is near. Let the wicked change their ways and banish the very thought of doing wrong. Let them turn to the Lord that He may have mercy on them. Yes, turn to our God, for He will forgive generously. And then those powerful words, those poetic words, we quote them so often. For my thoughts are nothing like your thoughts, and my ways are far beyond anything you could imagine. Just as the heavens are higher than the earth, so my ways are higher than your ways, my thoughts higher than your thoughts. You know what? We quote that, rightfully so, to help people to understand, to remind ourselves that God isn't like us, so much better than us. But I want you to focus your attention on the flow of the argument here in 55, Isaiah 55. He speaks those words in the direct context immediately following the invitation to come to Him. The idea of acceptance, the invitation to receive forgiveness. In other words, if I may paraphrase, if I may put it into Adrian's translation, he's saying this: don't think for a moment that I am as unforgiving, as shallow, and as impatient as you fallen human beings. Do not put your junk onto me when you think about me. I know how it is with you people. I know that you struggle to forgive those who do you wrong. I know that you hold grudges. I know that you go through the motions. You say, I forgive you, but there's just that little thing you hold on to. You rehearse it. You talk about it. You think about it. You learn to hate. You hold resentments and your grudges. I am not like that. Don't put that junk on me, because it will stand in the way of you coming to me. If you see me the way you know you are towards other people, you will never come to me. So think of me as entirely different to you when it comes to the score of forgiveness, when it comes to the experience of acceptance. My ways are much higher than your ways. My thoughts much higher than your thoughts. I do not hold resentments. I do not hold grudges. Come to me now. I don't care where you've been. I don't care how far you've fallen. I don't care what you've gotten up to. It's in the past, and I have done what needs to be done on the battlefield to feed you with the water of life. So come. So come. Don't worry about whether you're worthy, whether you have the money that you think I want. I don't want your money. I'm not interested in your worthiness. You're worthy because of what Jesus Christ has done. You're worthy because you're my son and you're my daughter. I want you to come. Do not judge me the way you judge other people. Do not think that I'm anything like that. I want you to come. My ways are not your ways. My thoughts are higher than your thoughts. When it comes to forgiveness, when it comes to acceptance, there is no depth you can go to that would turn me off, that would say, I want nothing to do with you anymore. I have died to redeem you. I have been on the battlefield. I have tasted your thirst, and more thirst than you will ever know, because when the Father God withdrew Himself from the presence of Jesus, that is about as thirsty as you can be. He knows your thirst, and He knows how to satisfy and to quench that thirst. So come to Him. Spend time in His presence. Drink from that fountain of life. The last place I'll take you to in Scripture this morning is Exodus chapter 17, Numbers chapter 20. Two remarkably similar stories. The one takes place at the beginning of the 40 years, a journey that wasn't supposed to be 40 years, a journey that was supposed to be a few days, a few weeks, from Egypt to Canaan, to the promised land. But you know how it went, right? And so after they've come out of Egypt by the mighty saving grace of the Lord, after they have walked through the Red Sea, after they've experienced the miracles of deliverance that God has brought to them, they get thirsty. Their natural supplies have run out. Everything they brought with from Egypt is being depleted. And now they are thirsty in the wilderness. And the irony of the story, as you know, despite all they've seen and they've experienced, and despite the very clear intentions of God for their good and their deliverance, they start murmuring and complaining. They don't ask for water. They turn on Moses. They turn on Aaron. They turn on God. You have brought us out into this place to die. It's what we do in our thirst, spiritually speaking. It's what we do in our thirst. Instead of coming to the one who will quench our thirst, we turn on the one who will satisfy that thirst. We blame Him for the thirst. We thirst because we are in the wilderness. We thirst because we left the fountain and went exploring in other places, but we turn on Him when we get thirsty. Isn't that the irony? And so there they are in the wilderness, and God says to Moses, here's what I want you to do, Moses. I want you to take that staff that you smote the river Nile with. I want you to take that that rod that you performed those miracles with. I want you to go over to that rock over there, Moses, and I want you to hit the rock. Now, I don't know what happened last time you hit a rock with a piece of wood. Which one came off second best? The piece of wood, right? But as God does, He turns this whole thing around, and as Moses strikes that rock with his staff, the rock splits and water pours out. And the people drink their fill. Fast forward, many dramas, many stories, many rebellions, many gracious interventions from God. 40 years later, He brings them back to the same place, in the same desert, with the same thirst. And what do the people do 40 years later? They murmur, they rebel, they complain against God in His thirst. And God says to Moses, Moses, see that rock over there? You remember it, right? Here's what I want you to do. I want you to take your staff and I want you to go over to that rock. And then what was he supposed to do? Don't hit it, Moses. I want you to speak to the rock. Now, again, I don't know if you've tried talking to the rocks on the mountains lately. There's probably a psychological label for that. But it's usually not very fruitful, is it? Again, a miracle is going to be performed. God is going to do something with the words of Moses to bring forth water from the rock to satisfy the thirst of His people. Moses, of course, in his anger and frustration, the Bible says in Numbers 20, goes over to that rock, picks up his staff, and beats it not once, but twice in anger and frustration. And the result of that act was that Moses did not go into the promised land. You think to yourself, wow, after 40 years, that was a very patient man. Why was God so harsh? Why was God so intense that Moses forfeited going into the promised land because he didn't speak to the rock, he hit the rock? And here's why. Because God was working out an illustration. Like with so much in the Old Testament, this was going to be an illustration of salvation. This whole thing, this whole wandering through the wilderness, the thirsting of the people, the providing of water supernaturally from a rock was all an illustration of salvation. Who is the rock? Jesus Christ is the rock of our salvation. Is that not true? Jesus is the rock, and on the cross, Jesus was struck on that wooden cross. Jesus was struck with the judgment of God, and it split Him open. And from that cross flows forever the water of life. And anybody who desires to drink from that water of life need only to come to the once and for all time judgment of God poured out upon Jesus Christ and not smite the rock, because that's already been done by the Father. All you need to do to receive the water of life is what? Talk to the rock. What do we call that? Prayer. Through prayer, you have access to the water of life. Through prayer, you have access to the forgiveness and the reconciliation and the wholeness that comes from the presence of God. Jesus was the rock that was split by the judgment of God so that you would never have to experience that. He is the rock that was opened, and from Him pours forth the very water of life, which is why in Revelation, the water of life flows from the throne where the rock sits. And to access that water of life, all that's needed is that you speak to the rock in faith. That's what Moses was supposed to do. Do what God said. In faith, speak to the rock. Something which didn't make sense, because no one who ever speaks to a rock gets water out of a rock except when the power of God is present. And you may think, what is the point of talking to the God in heaven? Does He even hear me? Well, I challenge you. Step forward in faith and speak to the rock, and see if that rock does not pour out that refreshing water upon your soul. See if your thirst is not quenched. See if you don't find yourself no longer hungering and thirsting for the junk food of the world. See if over time you learn to appreciate that water and find your contentment, your fulfillment, your peace, the meaning of your existence in that place of communion with God. See if your deliverance will not come from talking to the rock who was split in judgment in your behalf. Let me read our verse again. When the poor and needy search for water and there is none, and their tongues are parched from thirst, then I, the Lord, will answer them. I, the God of Israel, will never abandon them. I will open up rivers for them on the high plateaus. I will give them fountains of water in the valleys. I will fill the desert with pools of water. Rivers fed by springs will flow across the parched ground. I will plant trees in the barren desert, cedar, acacia, myrtle, olive, cypress, fir, and pine. I am doing this so all who see this miracle will understand what it means, that it is the Lord who has done this, the Holy One of Israel who created it. So it seems appropriate that in response this morning we sing a song, On Christ, the solid rock I stand. My hope is built on nothing less.
Built